Why don't you go back to the first screen? You good? All right, we're able to get started. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're a few minutes after 2. So good afternoon and welcome to the State Agency Summit 2021. Thank you for joining our National Trauma Work breakout session entitled NGA, which is the National Governors Association Adverse Childhood Experiences Work Group. We have approximately about 40 minutes to spend with you today. And if you have any questions, please place them in the chat. I am Renee Beeman. I'm the Director of the Division of State Service Centers within the Department of Health and Social Services. And my partner today is Terry Lawler, Trauma-Informed Practices in Social and Emotional Learning Educational Associate for the Department of Education. We are both actively involved and passionate about trauma-informed practices and care, and are delighted to share with you this afternoon. Next slide. This was such an exciting day, Thursday, October 18th, 2018, when Governor John Carney signed the Executive Order 24. For those of us involved in trauma work, we were overjoyed. But we knew some were scratching their heads trying to figure out what this meant and how would this happen. How would Delaware, with all of its uniqueness and complexities, become a trauma-informed state? What changes will need to occur? The executive order directed by the Family Services Cabinet Council to develop tools for training state employees and community partners on the impact of exposure of ACEs, which I'm sure we all know it stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Also, to promote ACE awareness and to improve services and interventions for children and families exposed to trauma. So in November of 2019, Governor Carney released the Family Services Cabinet Council's Trauma-Informed Care Progress Report and Action Plan for all state Delaware agencies. This plan serves as a progress report for each agency to work to implement Executive Order 24. Using the Delaware developmental framework for trauma-informed care, and I'll show you that in just a few minutes, this document outlines best practices for trauma-informed care, as each state agency will set benchmarks for their department to reach. The framework was adapted from Missouri Model of Trauma-Informed Care and was adopted in collaboration by the Family Services Cabinet Council ACE Subcommittee and the Compassionate Connections Partnership. We definitely, on this day and even now, we thank Governor Carney for making this huge step. Next slide, please. While the executive order was signed in 2018, the Department of Health and Social Services, we began our work in 2017 to educate, sensitize, and help change the culture of care through my division, State Service Centers, in partnership with the divisions of Social Service and Child Support Services, along with the guidance then of Dr. Kara Walker, the secretary, and the academic training by Wilmington University's College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. We then began the work to introduce trauma-informed approach to all 3 divisions. Yes, this was a huge and bold and exciting venture, but we can truly say it was worth it. Our divisions have a client share touch point, which we felt would assist in the goal of culture change and improve client services through trauma training. What you see on the screen are 26 staff from the 3 divisions, State Service Centers, Social Service, and Child Support, receiving in-depth 12-week training from Wilmington University to serve as trauma-informed approach trainers for the remaining staff of each of our divisions. Yes, all staff were involved, fiscal, IT, everyone were nicely volunteered to participate. And that was significant in helping to promote and achieve the education and culture change goals set. The staff trainings were 2 full days, and to date, approximately 1,300 staff have received trauma training. As you can imagine, 2020 kind of knocked out our second phase, but Hopefully soon we will begin to retrain those who haven't received that training. It was a life-changing experience for the trainers, the staff, instructors, and this was the first time Wilmington University expanded their work to work with a state agency. While the department doesn't work directly with children, the adults, parents, and caregivers that we service impact the lives of children they care for. So understanding ACEs is key to understanding trauma. Next slide. This is an extremely busy slide, but it is a synopsis of all the work that we did to educate and train staff. And it was submitted to our department's research project contest. And we received third place honors for all the work that we did. Our outcomes were to engage in better self-care for staff to promote more effective services, increase knowledge and awareness of the prevalence of trauma and its impact on staff, clients, and system, the importance of implementation of trauma-informed policies and procedures, and also utilizing the 6 SAMHSA principles to transform our Department of Health system. A work group was created from this training and continues to serve as trauma leaders even today, providing educational opportunities, training, and valuable ongoing information to support staff. Next slide. As promised, this slide is the Delaware developmental framework from the Missouri model adopted by our subcommittee of the Family Services Cabinet Council trauma team. This framework allows for assessment, analysis, and a great temperature check for agencies and organizations as we move towards truly becoming a trauma-informed state. The work is being done by the Family Services Cabinet Council, and now with the help of the National Governors Association, NGA, plus supportive work of Trauma Matters Delaware, our lead nonprofit trauma organization. And this framework displays the stages and qualifying markers that guide movement through being trauma aware to being trauma informed. Next slide. Our relationship with NGA has been helpful in moving us towards achieving that goal of Delaware becoming a trauma-informed state. Governor Carney last August announced Delaware as one of the 4 states chosen by the National Governors Association to participate in learning collaboratives focused on recognizing and responding to adverse childhood experiences. We joined teams from Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Wyoming in the improving well-being and success of families and children, addressing adverse childhood experiences through learning collaboratives through the National Governors Association for Best Practices. This initiative has provided us access for 10 months of technical assistance, engagement with trauma-informed mentor states, and information about innovative and evidence-based policies practice for responding to adverse childhood experiences. It is exciting that we are not alone in this quest of becoming trauma-informed as we join multiple states in this initiative. Next slide. Here you will see the NGA cohort principles that are being adapted, identifying common language, creating universal training, and so important, cultivating a culture of change. Next slide. The Department of Health and Social Services, through all of the persons that we serve through our work and commitment to our fellow Delawareans, we are incorporating this framework, the proposed training, the resources to provide and promote collaboration through our professional practice, our programs, our services, policies, funding, all based on philosophies and trauma-informed approach that we've learned, are learning, and continue to embrace. It is worth the great work. Next slide. Aiding our work is the strategic timeline that, as the Family Services Cabinet Council Subcommittee, is our creation of a timeline for the planned work to keep us on track and focused. I'm going to toss it now, the remainder of the presentation, to Terry, who has truly a wealth of information that will continue to help Delaware become truly a trauma-informed state. Terry?
Thank you, Renee. Next slide, please. So as Renee stated earlier, I'm Terry Lawler, Education Associate for Trauma-Informed Practices and Social and Emotional Learning at Delaware Department of Education. Next slide, Deshawn. Our work has been conceptualized around building a statewide culture of care so that we can bridge hope and opportunity for young people who've been impacted by trauma and toxic stress. Next slide, please. And we talk about toxic stress because that is the long-term, ongoing adversity that impairs brain functioning and really changes the physical, cognitive, and emotional well-being trajectory for students, or at least it has the potential to, when not mitigated by strong relationships, caring environments, and opportunities to learn how to work that stress out of their system. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have stated for a number of years that childhood trauma and toxic stress are at an all-time national health crisis level. Now, we have seen our government respond to health crisis, to a health crisis in the past year. And just imagine if we mobilized all of our forces to respond to childhood trauma and adversity in the same way, just how different our communities, our schools, our families would function. And that's what we're aiming for. Next slide, please. And so this is just a synopsis of some of the impacts or changes to development and brain functioning based on the experience of adversity. We know that the research shows changes in the volume of the brain, changes in the way we respond and embrace relationships, inabilities to process difficult emotions, and being able to bounce back and move on from experiences. All of these things can impair learning and development and mental well-being. And that's why it's important for us to approach this work universally in our state schools. Next slide. At the latest, the prior census, we knew that 51% of Delawareans under the age of 18 had experienced at least one adverse childhood experience by that report. 23 of that 51%, 23% had experienced two or more. Next slide. This slide shows how that plays out in our state's classrooms. Potentially 6 students, more than 6 students have experienced no adverse childhood experiences. Okay, so right around 6, but 5 students have at least one adversity. 6 have 2, 3 with 3, 7 with 4 to 5 adverse experiences, and then 3 with 6 or more. And so in a typical classroom of about 30 students, you're looking at possibly 6 to 12 students who've experienced enough adversity to disrupt their learning and behavior. Next slide, please. And so we've approached this very universally because we know that in highly stressed environments, and Deshawn, you're going to have to click through because there are a number of statistics that are going to pop up. We think this is important work for us to focus on because in highly stressed environments, please click, there you go. We have a great deal of teacher turnover. We have lots of stress. New teachers, about half of our new teachers leave the profession within 5 years, and 46% of teachers experience enough daily stress to disrupt their own lives as well as the lives of their families. Next slide, please. This is important because stress is contagious, okay? Our brains have mirror neurons that allow us to regulate ourselves based on what's happening around us. Because of that, we know that students who are in classroom environments that are supported by anxious or stressed out teachers tend to report higher cortisol levels and higher levels of stress themselves. And so for that reason, we have approached this work and prioritized teaching as much as we can about the brain science to our educators, but also our school partners, to include our out of school time and community center partners, as well as parents and caregivers, because all of us need to come together as a community to support stronger brain development and less stress in our children. Children do as best as they can with the right supports. We want to create the enabling conditions so that all of them have the supports needed to thrive. Next slide, please. And so we've approached this work in a community resilience model, where we begin with a shared understanding of toxic stress and adversity, strategies that build our own resilience, and supporting each other in developing a narrative or a trauma story, okay, so that we're able to talk about and share those adverse experiences. We build a state of readiness in our schools and communities with capacity building of all of our partners, and also examining policies and practices that support eliminating re-traumatization. We also have formed cross-sector partnerships that look at how we connect within the school, but also outside of the school, so that we're really building strength into our communities, because we know that our students live beyond the school day. And then ultimately, we want to build a strong set of advocates or champions like each one of you here today, so that you can go out and advocate for better policies, practices, and systems that support the well-being of all of our young people in our community. Next slide. Our work early on, I think Renee explained that Governor Carney signed Executive Order 24 in October of 2018. Early on, the Department of Education recognized that this was work that needed leadership and created a position. So I accepted that position in November of 2018, but knew from the beginning that this was work that would be twofold, and really in some aspects three. So we had work that needed to be done within the Department of Education to build systems and practices, but we also had a great deal of work that was ongoing in our school communities through the support of the Office of the Child Advocate, Delaware State Education Association, Casey Family Programs, and a number of early adopter districts who were out there advocating from, really over the last 10 years to make sure that we implemented trauma-informed care to create safe and supportive school climates and learning environments. Our work within the department began with a strategic plan, writing the plan to include the development of a wellness committee, integrating our trauma awareness training into onboarding or quarterly onboarding sessions for new staff. We've had book studies, and we continue to support this work with chat and choose. So on a regular basis, a lot less regular during the last 12 months, but prior to, we had institutionalized chat and choose, where we come together to learn some of the very concepts that our educators and frontline staff were learning in our schools, and implementing, trying out some of those interventions that were being used to support students in managing their stress and self-regulation skills. Our outward-facing work has been developed around a trauma training cadre. So we have 132 trainers in our districts and charter schools. We also host quarterly trainings and trainings for trainers in partnership with the kids department. And we have about 66 community-based trauma trainers that participate there. All of those groups are given the charge to go out and spread awareness within our school communities and districts at large. Lastly, when it comes to system integration, we have developed partnerships across agencies to manage and monitor supports for students and families. We have a partnership with the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. CASEL is the acronym that's used for them. Delaware became one of CASEL's collaborating states in December of 2018, recognizing that solid social and emotional competence is a foundation for well-being. And so we have built our universal strategies around social and emotional learning skills. Over the last 12 months, we have completed K-12 SEL competencies that are aligned with our preschool social and emotional learning standards. We also, with the support of a number of educators and community partners, have crosswalked our SEL competencies with our academic content standards and developed resource toolkits for implementing SEL throughout the school day. We envision SEL skills being taught across every aspect of the day, as opposed to a special course or time period once a week. These are the mindsets, essential skills, and habits that are needed to be successful in school, but also in life. Our students need them, but our adults need them. So this is ongoing learning that all of us share in. Next slide, please. All of our work has been conceptualized to support college and career readiness and development of the whole child. And so we've integrated all of our systems across the department to respond to the need. Strikingly, this is work that we began prior to this year, but it has been amplified over the last 12 months. And so we have built our multi-tiered systems of support to respond to trauma and adversity, but also to student and educator well-being. Next slide, please. We began with team building. So in the next few slides, I'll show you a couple of the various aspects of the work while I get to present. There's a team of folks who support me in getting the work accomplished in our department, but also throughout the state schools. And so we began with lots of team building. Next slide. We'll go through these quickly, Deshawn. We have our departmental learning that I talked about. These are some of the activities that our colleagues at the Department of Education participate in our chat and choose. We have our new employee induction that allows our staff to come in and learn about the brain science of adversity. Next slide, please. And also, in our induction program, we offer supports for the lead mentors throughout the state and support them in supporting new teacher inductees. So they would be the new teachers. We also have work to develop our early childhood workforce. We have a number of in-person and online trainings available to support early childhood educators and caregiver systems. A lot of that work is built around self-care through a partnership with Pure Edge Inc. And Pure Edge Inc. also provided for the last 2 years subscriptions to the Headspace app for all of our educators, because again, we can't pour from an empty well. We really have institutionalized the importance of self-care and making sure that we are regulated so we can co-regulate with the children and youth that we serve. Next slide, please. Our adult and prison education staff have participated in awareness trainings. They also have Ms. Jerry Gu, who is specifically positioned to support and facilitate trauma-informed care within those systems. Next slide, please. The next few slides will talk about our teacher trainings and capacity building with educators in our state school districts and charters. Next slide. So all of our trainings have been mapped across that developmental framework for trauma-informed care. And so here we have a listing of all of the trainings at each stage or level of development, as well as the corresponding book studies, simulations, activities, learning activities that go into those particular levels of care. The intent is to move us from a state of awareness to being aware of our own trauma histories and reflective of our biases so that we can respond specifically to the needs of students based on the experiences that they have had. We also, and I'll talk about it a little bit further, we have some more specialized supports that we offer to students who have had more direct challenges that are limiting their ability to access curriculum and make the most of their educational experience based on their trauma. Next slide. And so we have taken SAMHSA's 4 R's to heart in our intent to realize and understand the brain science of trauma, to take a look at intersections of inequality and the assumptions and biases that feed those inequalities, to recognize the impact of dysregulation and how dysregulation plays out and informs student as well as adult behavior. We believe strongly that behavior is communication. And so we have to look at some of the root causes and the underlying characteristics that are motivating behavior and use that information in our response. And we try to respond with our own adult self-regulation, but from a strength-based perspective where we take into account positive childhood experiences that also mitigate some of those challenges or adversities and really try to build on the protective factors that will change the trajectory and promote post-traumatic growth and recovery. Okay, we believe that healing happens in relationships, and so we want to cultivate systems that support and build opportunities for students to heal and build resilience after experiencing challenges. Next slide, please. Our mindfulness work lays a foundation for our physical, psychological, and emotional safety in our state schools, and rests on a foundation of strong relationships. We've embedded our social and emotional learning practices within our classrooms, but throughout the school day, so that they're foundational to every relationship that takes place in our buildings. And we often say that every interaction is an opportunity for an intervention. Next slide. I talked a little bit about our social and emotional learning work earlier, but this is a slide from CASEL, our technical assistance partner, that really demonstrates the importance of, at the center of the circle, focusing on individual student skills like self-awareness, self-management, being able to empathize and perspective take for building social awareness and strong relationships, and then managing responsible decisions. But none of that could happen without the outer rings that create the enabling context. Those outer rings all focus on systems and adult practices. And so we often say that we can't jump over the adults to get to the kids. And this really demonstrates that. We want our adults building the very same level of skills that our students need to be successful in their school lives, but also ultimately in their college and career lives. Next slide, please. So one of our core activities is the brain architecture game. We believe that every adult in Delaware ought to have an opportunity to participate in the brain architecture game because experiences build the brain, and we all can benefit from strong brains from birth to adulthood. We encourage our training teams to host and facilitate those trainings for school boards as well as community members. If you have not had a chance to participate in the brain architecture game, please reach out. We would love to, once we have the ability to be back in person, we'd love to share this opportunity with your organizations and communities. Next slide. This is actually a training that was done in Red Clay a few years ago with their school board. And so their trauma trainers facilitated this training for their superintendent and school board members. Next slide. Our mindfulness-based stress reduction work is really meant to examine whether or not our minds are full and cluttered, or if we are consciously aware of and reflective of being ready to meet the moment in the present. And we do that, some of us through deep breathing and mindfulness-based stress reduction practices. But a lot of this work is built around helping our colleagues and community members understand what relaxes them, okay? All of us have different needs, and we want people to be aware and spend time identifying where they hold stress in their physical bodies, understanding their triggers and what happens environmentally to trigger stress in their bodies, but also to develop a repertoire of strategies that help them work that stress out of their bodies. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk says that the body keeps the score, and the way we build a healthier community and reduce the social determinants of health that are connected with our stress is by identifying what triggers us, but also where we're holding that stress so that we can work it out systematically out of the body. Next slide, please. And so we have attempted to create a culture that's responsive to preventing staff burnout and compassion fatigue. We want our educators to understand the impact of caring too much. We have educators who are very invested in the well-being of their students, and we explain it just that way. And sometimes the cost of caring too much is that we go home and carry a lot of stress with us. And so we want to develop our self-care practices, but we also on a regular basis are sharing tips, tools, intervention strategies that help us work out that stress. We also measure so that we have data to support the work that we're doing. So we measure the impact of trauma-informed schools. We also complete in a number of school communities the Professional Quality of Life Survey. The ProQual is used to get a sense of the educators' perceptions around organizational support and whether or not our systems and practices are responding to the needs of educators and will help us build a strong, healthy workforce. Thank you. Next slide. And so within that culture of care, these pictures show a number of staff teams that participated in well-being activities, but also in the process created strategic plans, follow-up activities at 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year for their particular environments so that they could respond to the needs and keep that ongoing work going in their school communities. Next slide. I think I'm almost done. All of this is done, this work is integrated within our multi-tiered systems of support so that we have universal strategies, we have some of our small group or more targeted opportunities for this work, as well as more selected or individualized supports for students. Next slide. One of our tier 2 or targeted opportunities is Project Aware. Project Delaware is in Capital, Colonial, and Indian River School Districts. It's a 5-year pilot project funded by SAMHSA so that Delaware schools are really building mental health systems that advance wellness and resilience. Next slide. And you may have seen some of these marketing materials focused on reducing the stigma around mental health access, but all of those are from the social media account for Project Aware. Next slide, please. A more targeted support is Project Thrive, which is a 5-year grant-funded project for trauma resilience from the U.S. Department of Education. 85% of those funds are allotted to support trauma-specific interventions for students in public, private, and home schools. So every school-aged child in Delaware is able to receive those direct supports if they've experienced trauma and adversity. We also have a multidisciplinary training institute that is a part of that work, and that has allowed us to provide trauma-specific training to our educators as well as our mental health providers and school partners. Project Thrive has 25 contracted providers who are paid directly from the Delaware Department of Education with these funds to provide those trauma-specific supports for students. Next slide, please. And again, our overall intent is to tip the scale on adversity and create a culture in Delaware where we are not measuring the success of our communities or lack of success by the adverse experiences of those communities, but really focused on protective factors and cultivating positive experiences so all of our children can thrive. This is fairly new research. It's come out in the last 2 years or so, but we have adapted and changed the focus of our work to make sure we're building in opportunities to be strength-based and support resilience. Next slide. So we shift from a more traditional view of student behavior to a healing-centered view focused on assets, asking the question, what happened to you, but ultimately, what's right with you, right? And not looking to blame and shame students for behavior deficits. Next slide. We want to build strong connections. And if you go to the next slide, so we have time for questions, we want to reframe to focus on assets. And I included this slide and use it a lot in trainings because often when we come into environments, we can pick out every single thing that looks wrong, okay? But I'll tell you some things that are going right in what looks like a picture of chaos. Mom has her hand on a book, so she is literate. She has relationships because she's talking on the phone. There's electricity in the home. The children have toys. There are cleaning products, and there's also food. And so we want to meet people where they are and reframe to focus on assets so that we can really be a support and not another area of blame, shame, re-traumatization for the people that we serve. Next slide. All of our work is designed to bring healing and recovery because we know that the flower that blooms in adversity is the rarest and most beautiful of all. So we want to see kids really thrive and go out and do great things with these supports and all of the supports of our Delaware community. So thank you. If you have any questions, we have a few minutes. We'd love to respond.